Why you suck at Total War, reason number 7. You have no strategy. You may have learned how to choose the appropriate units to deal with an enemy faction, but that is useless if you don't decide on a strategy to use to make the most of all those units. Now let's first address one of the biggest mistakes I see many people make. That is what we call a reactive playstyle. You sit back, perhaps on a nice defensible position, and you let the enemy come to you. You don't move forward and try to micro your army, hell no. You just let the enemy push up on you and try to execute his strategy, because hey, it's way easier, right, to just sit back and let the enemy do all the thinking, and then you're just going to try and react to that. That's the easy way to play, right? You don't need to micro. Mistake. Say no to the reactive playstyle. It will leave you falling behind. Let me get into it. When one plays reactively, and that is not to be confused with playing defensively, by the way, you're giving your opponent all the control. You allow him to try and impose his game plan and strategy on you. The problem with this is that your opponent will make, say, 3 decisions, and then you'll try to react to those 3 decisions if you spot them. And in the time it took you to react to those 3 decisions, he's made another 4 decisions, and then you've got to try and react to those, and you end up falling behind in the decision making, basically. Which typically means your enemy will have an easier time getting the engagements he wants. So, stop allowing people to impose their will on you. Have some balls and try to pull off your own strategy on the enemy, instead of letting them do it to you. So no longer will you just bring a bunch of units and then try to figure out how to use them when you're there on the battlefield. Think about how you want to use them while you're selecting them. Why are you bringing them? What's their plan? How are they going to work together with all the other units? This is where builds come in. So, what the hell is a build for those of you who are new? A build is when you select a certain concoction of units that all have the same goal and strategy in mind. You then look for certain situations and opponents where this strategy may be useful. So, how the frick do we put a build together? What do we have to do? What do we need? First thing you're going to need after you've chosen your faction is of course a strategy. Given the unit variety in Total War Warhammer, there are many to choose from. You could try to outnumber your opponent with a tide of units. You could try rushing up and closing the distance quickly to take away any ranged advantages. You could bring an army with a lot of cavalry to try and cycle charge the crap out of your foes. If the opposing army has a lot of armor, you're going to need units that can punch through that armor. Perhaps you want a powerful front line so you can break the enemy's front line quickly. Maybe you want to find a good piece of terrain and go defensive, bring some artillery and missiles and batter the enemy before they reach you. You may want to pour a lot of powerful units into one side and bring a powerful flanking attack. Or you could look for that hammer and anvil with a good holding front line and then some cavalry to come around the back. And those are just a handful of the many strategies you could employ. So you've chosen your faction and your strategy, now you've got to think about who the hell you're going to use it against. There are many factions with many different strengths and weaknesses. One specific strategy will not work against every single faction. You'll need to change things up depending on who you're facing. For example, let's take the outnumber strategy. These factions are designed to execute that strategy very well, so it's a good one to use with them, and it tends to do well against factions with squishier infantry. Those with heavy infantry or good endurance, well, there it may not work so well. And that's using your army's strength to create a weakness for the enemy. Alternatively, you could, instead of using your own strength, try to take advantage of one of the enemy's weaknesses. Take the anti-armor build for example, of course designed for destroying those factions with lots of armor, as that is something that these factions can rely on to get them through a battle, so we're simply trying to take that away. So you're either trying to create a strength with the faction that you're using, or you're looking to exploit an enemy's weakness. You can potentially even do a bit of both. There's so many variables and so many options, honestly it's quite endless. So to reiterate, start trying to make yourself some builds. Pick your faction and then ask yourself these questions. Who is my enemy? What's their strengths and weaknesses? And then, which strategy or game plan do you want to impose on your enemy? What could potentially work well or catch the enemy out? And lastly, which units are going to get that job done? All units you take should be geared towards the strategy you have in mind. Don't take anything randomly for no real reason. So, start using builds. Don't just select your units randomly before a fight and then try to figure out the best strategy to use them during the battle. That is a terrible idea. You should know what you're planning to do before the battle has even begun, while you're on the unit selection screen. If you want to stop sucking at Total War, you've got to start taking the initiative in battle. The same idea also applies to campaign. As the lore masters here, if I wanted to go to war with say the dwarves, or maybe the lizard men, I'm going to need some armor piercing in my army. And a lot of it. If I was going to face a different opponent, say the Skaven, then I probably need a different strategy. I don't really need armor piercing against the Skaven. I need more numbers, so I need a lot of cheaper units. So it's wise to prepare yourself accordingly. If you're going to need that armor piercing, start recruiting armor piercing units. You can usually figure out who may declare war on you or who you want to declare war on, so you can kind of tell what's coming and prepare properly. So this whole idea can work in campaign, but of course it's mostly geared towards multiplayer, where we can select our entire army before the battle. We know what enemies coming after us, we know what map and terrain we've got to work with, so we can plan accordingly. Allow me to demonstrate the construction of a few builds for you. So I've got the Dark Elves and I've got the Lizard Men coming my way. I'm going to opt for a ranged anti-large strategy. As the Dark Elves have great armor piercing missiles, that's going to be fantastic at taking on the Lizard Men. I can whittle down the armor of their infantry, and my best hope of gunning down those large monsters that are hard to get hold of is going to be using those armor piercing missiles, which will melt dinos pretty quick for the record. So my front line is mostly spears with a couple of Blackguard of Naggarond to help with any of those elite monsters that may come our way, so lots of anti-large in my front line. Dread Spears aren't going to beat Saurus Warriors if that's what the enemy front line is, so we'll need to use some of our missiles to whittle that front line down a bit. The strategy and build is going to be all about picking the right targets at the right time and trying to protect those missile units as much as possible. I've got some cavalry in there that could maybe harass or help protect those missiles if need be, and we'll take a Death Hag with Spirit Leech and Fate of Yuna just to help whittle down any single powerful targets that we may need to. So hopefully you can understand that strategy and what I'm trying to do and how I thought about this build when constructing it. Does it work well against human players playing as the Lizard Men? I don't know, I haven't tested it. This is the other part of builds, is that you have to keep trying them out and trying them out and trying them out. See if they work, see if there's certain areas of the build that maybe aren't working at all. You can change things out, you can tweak it a little bit. This is how we get our builds. Let's do another one. We've got Wood Elves versus Vampires. Now, I know that a weakness of the Vampires is that they don't deal with large units very well because they don't have great anti-large. So my strategy is to exploit that. Bring some powerful large units that they can't take down easily. I'm going to bring that in the form of Tree Men. Skeleton Spearmen, Blood Knights, a Terrorgeist, none of those things are very effective as anti-large against a Tree Man. And as they have no missiles as well, it makes it even harder for them to take them down. So a triple tree threat is what I'm working with here, and they'll be able to smash most vampire infantry by themselves. In case of monsters, I'll bring a front line of Eternal Guard without shields. As there's no missiles, the shields aren't greatly needed, so that should be fine in the anti-large department. Now naturally I want to take some missiles, and Glade Guard would normally be a good choice, but against the vampires, spawning up zombies all over you, Glade Guard aren't going to deal with that very well. I'll take some Deepwood Scouts who can kite away and still do damage if zombies should come after them. And then just a bit of cavalry to protect our flanks. Wild Riders, of course, a great choice. Again, don't really need shields, so we'll save the money. And then we've got a bit of money left over for maybe some more anti-large. Asteroid Spear War Dancers, just in case of any elite large units that may come our way. Mortis Engines, Vargolfs, etc. So there you go. There's my Tree Man Vampire Smashing Army. You can see everything's come with a plan and a build. I've got magic, I've got some healing on the Tree Man, so I'll try and keep the Tree Men alive as much as possible. My missiles can keep away from that vampire strength of being able to spawn zombies everywhere. They can also help protect the Tree Men by blasting any anti-large units that may try to get after them. And the Spearmen can of course help keep everything safe from large. And a final one, I've got Greenskins versus Skaven. Now normally as the Greenskins you may want to overrun and outnumber your opponent, but that may not work so well because the Skaven are good at doing that too. So we're going to try something a little more unorthodox for the Greenskins and see if we can catch the enemy out. I'm going to bring Wurzag on his boar just with a couple of spells so I can get my Lord and my magic all in one to save some money. I'll bring a Goblin Big Boss to help protect him though on a Spider, as that is always a good safe bodyguard bet. Now my strategy for this is going to be a cav heavy army from the Greenskins, not something you might see too often as the cav of the Greenskins isn't great. It's best with a lot of numbers, so that's what we're going to try and bring. I've got a bunch of the cheapest boar boys and some of the anti-large ones as well as the broken tusk mob, as they are pretty powerful and can encourage those lesser units. I'll bring the mangy marauders as well, as their harassing armor piercing can be quite useful. For a front line, I'll just bring something that can smash those lightly armoured Skaven infantry, Savage Orcs. So my plan will be to charge in with those Savage Orcs and the cavalry all at once, try and get some surrounding, some hammer and anvil, some cycle charging as much as I can with all that cavalry. I'm not sure how well it'll work because the Greenskins cavalry isn't great, but against the right faction with the right build, it could work a treat. And as I say, it may catch the enemy off guard. He may prepare with a lot of elite units, which will mean his army is very small, making it very easy for me to surround him, and I do have quite a bit of armor piercing and all that cavalry. So it's certainly more of a riskier game plan, but there's potential for it to work. I'm trying to create a strength that he doesn't expect me to have. So from all this, I hope you can see what it takes and what goes into making a build. I hope you understand the process and you can try it out yourself, because it's really not that difficult. Throw something together and then test it and tweak it. That's really how any build is made. It's that simple. You'll find out which strategies are effective, which faction they're effective against. Some will work, some won't. And sometimes you'll just get plain bad luck. You may bring a really unorthodox strategy for your faction, but your enemy may just happen to bring the perfect counter for it. So you're going to be at a disadvantage going into that battle from the start. But again, this is part of Total War and it is just a luck thing. And when that happens, you'll need one of the most valuable skills any Total War player can have. Any ideas what that is? Anyone? What do you reckon? If you said, 12 dragons, mate, then you're an absolute clown hole. If you however said, adaptability, you'd be bang on, my friend. Example time. So I've got myself a Beastmen build here and I'm going up against the High Elves. This build is quite simple in its design and strategy. I've got a front line of Goreherd with shields, who are one of the best holding units as a front line for the Beastmen. Then I've got a bunch of Minotaurs, who are very clearly going to flank round and come round behind all these holding units to smash everything in the back, as well as some Centaurs and some flanking units on the other side as well. The plan is simple, and I'm trying to utilise the strength of my powerful Minotaur units to smash the crap out of High Elves. Now in this case, the High Elf army is a small but powerful one. Their front line is 4 units of Swordmasters of Hoeth, who will absolutely tear my Goreherd to shreds, preventing them from holding long enough for my Minotaurs to get round the back of the Swordmasters. So instead, I'm going to bring my Minotaurs into the centre to try and face these Swordmasters head on, as they will have an absolute field day with Swordmasters of Hoeth. So I don't want my infantry fighting that highly superior opponent. Instead, I'll bring the Minotaurs in, who are going to do a much better job of taking care of those Swordmasters. So you can see I came in with a plan that I wanted to execute a heavy flanking attack, but based on the enemy's army composition, that then seemed like a bad idea. I switched up the game plan and the strategy slightly to make it more favourable for me. It's not necessarily that we would have lost the battle if we'd stuck to the original plan, but this way is definitely more effective and we're going to do more damage and take less casualties. So that's being adaptive with your build and strategy. My build was probably favoured over the High Elf build in the situation, and it was against the AI, who is quite easy to beat most of the time. Now, same thing again, on Beastmen, exactly the same build, exactly the same strategy and game plan, but I'm faced with a different High Elf army. There's a lot of spearmen, some Phoenix Guard in there, a bunch of missiles, so lots more stuff that can take down my precious Minotaurs, who are the main strength of this build. So we can go ahead and try to execute the game plan as intended. Our Goreherd front line should hold up just fine against the spearmen of the High Elves, then we just got to try and flank round and hit them in the back as soon as possible. We do need to be a little bit more careful here though. You don't need to be a genius to see that all these spears are going to cause problems for my Minotaurs, so I can't leave them in combat with them for too long. The missiles may also whittle them down, and if the AI was smarter, they would probably be focus firing them right now, but hey, it's the AI. They nearly got my Lord dead here with this cheeky dragon. I'm going to try and pin him down as much as I can with some Minotaurs and spears. That's going to be a good victory if we can hold on to him. Front lines are engaging, mostly in okay condition, taking some artillery fire. There's Phoenix Guard in there as well, they could be a problem. But going to send the Minotaurs through now. Going to go for the original strategy and game plan. There's a gaping great hole. 1 cavalry there that's not going to be able to do much because it's got 2 units of cavalry on it. But for the most part, the intended game plan is coming off here. Going to start moving around so we can start hitting these anti-large units in the back. And you can see a lot of my Goreherd is starting to struggle here. It's just about in need of those Minotaurs to come and save them. They're all wavering at the moment. But the Minotaurs have just arrived. Going to get this first charge on this one. And it's going to pretty much save this Goreherd. You see they stopped routing because the more powerful Minotaurs turned up to help out. And then it's the Spearmen who start routing. So you see we're working together to support each other there as an army. If the Minotaurs got there even later, or they ran off and chased someone else, then the Goreherd would definitely have broken and run away. But they've been able to keep in the fight because they've had the support from my other units, working together for that flanking strategy. And then it's just a case of cycle charging the Minotaurs, not leaving them in combat with those powerful anti-large units too long, and it's a comfortable victory for this strategy. We didn't have to change it too much, just a bit of cycle charging on those anti-large units. And one more, same build, same game plan, different enemy though. This time there's a lot of cavalry from the High Elves, some Dragon Princes, Silver Helms, there's some Skirmisher Cav in there, Spears, and 2 frickin' dragons. So now my game plan pretty much goes entirely out the window. This cavalry looked like it was coming straight for me, so I made my first adaptable adjustment by bringing the spearmen out front to try and protect the gore herd. I then see the cavalry going around the side, so I'm going to get my general and minotaurs out of there and get the spearmen into them. The spearmen are going far right trying to chase some cavalry because that makes complete sense. But on this side it's a bit of a struggle. I've got Dragon Princes all up in here, there's 2 dragons around. I'm trying to send as much support for this side as I can to try and beat these Dragon Princes, but the dragons start coming in and causing all sorts of problems. I'm sending over my other spear units, I'm going to send over these minotaurs, and on the far side I'm trying to get these Dragon Princes off the field quick by ploughing a lot of units into them. So now I'm having to use complete adaptability and completely change my game plan. I hadn't intended to use my army this way at all, but now I have to adapt or I'm going to lose. I have to do my best to get the favourable engagements to me, or they're going to take me down. So I can identify that the dragons are some of the strengths here, and I need to get hold of these because I don't have a lot of ways to deal with them. I need to get minotaurs on them as quickly as possible, and on every opportunity. So when they land like they are now, I'm getting minotaurs after them, trying to get their health down as quickly as possible, because I can't shoot them down, I've got no missiles. I've got some minotaurs on these Dragon Princes with my Lord, so we're doing okay. On this side the infantry is coming for us, spears getting after my minotaurs and cavalry. I'm going to make sure I get the right matchup there. I'm going to take these gore herd and get them into the spearmen because that's their fight, that's who they need to be fighting. The minotaurs are going to get away from that fight and start to move over towards the dragons. I'm adapting here. I'm trying to get the good matchups and engagements all over. Going to get a cheeky rear charge on these spearmen to try and break them as they're wavering. And everything is looking not too shabby now. We're whittling down their cavalry and the dragons are pretty beaten up. So hopefully this is a good illustration of being adaptable with your build. The enemy may bring an army which won't allow you to do what you want to do, so you have to change, adapt and evolve. Honestly, a lot of this just comes from knowing all the units and knowing the engagements you can and can't win, and then doing your best to get those engagements. If you leave your units in bad matchups, you're gonna lose. So basically, adapt or die. And with this, we can highlight the last very important point about having builds. And that is that the more you use one specific build, the more you learn about it. The more you know what its strengths are and what its weaknesses are. What enemy armies can it deal with well? What factions can it deal with well? What does it struggle with? The more battles you play against the more different opponents, you get to learn these ins and outs, and you'll know it for the future. Because if your build is always the same, you never have to wonder what your strengths and weaknesses are, because you should know exactly. This is another big difference between better and worse players. Worse players use a different army every time and never really know where their strength or game plan is. Better players using a build know exactly how to deal with certain situations with that build because they've done it so many times. For example, that Beastmen build I just used against all that cavalry. I've now gained some experience with that build against fighting cav heavy armies. So if I face a cav heavy Empire army or a cav heavy Bretonnian army, the same rules are going to apply. I'll know how to deal with that situation because I've used that build in that situation before. And that is monumentally better than playing with a different build every single time you play a certain faction. So there we go, the power of builds and strategy. No longer can you sit there playing reactively and expect to get anywhere. It's time to come up with some strategies and try to impose them on the enemy, rather than just sitting there and letting the enemy do whatever the hell he wants to you. Have some cojones and take the fight to the enemy, goddammit. This is another important step towards total war supremacy. Allow me to leave you on this quote from our almighty Lord and Saviour in heaven, Bruce Lee. I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times.